Alright everybody, my name is Travos, and in this video I'm going to be kind of doing a documentation of all of the things that you can do with the fundamentals of movement in Black Ops 3. Mostly to compare for Infinite Warfare and, you know, kind of show you guys how to do everything properly and understand all of the little in-depth features of every little mechanic. So, without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing is, instead of just thrusting like that, right? First thing, obviously, we can air strafe, getting much more distance. Now, we utilize curving in the air. Instead of just going straight, we utilize curving. So that allows us to do kind of a thing like strafe jumping, like that in past Call of Duties, which isn't really a big thing in this game. It might not even actually do anything, but it still holds true with curving in the air. And curves hold a huge part of a lot of things. So what we can also do is edge slide and thrust, right? A lot of us know this. We know this as the edge slide, but what you might not know is that you can curve your slide, your initial slide out from where you're going, so curve it, and then thrusting, curve that, and your thrust stutter at the end for extra height if you do so, which the difference is if you just hold your thrust like that, or if you thrust stutter like that, you get a little bit more distance and prolong your everything. So you can curve those. You can curve everything within that whole sequence, right? The initial slide, the thrust out of the slide, and curve the thrust stutter out. Curve, curve, curve. Like that. And obviously, if done right, I should be able to mantle. Done very perfectly. But, you get the point. Rather than just simply doing that, it's a little bit better. And it helps speed, of course. But even if you don't want to thrust out, you can obviously also just slide straight into a bounce. Right? And bouncing is another mechanic, which is kind of implied by the last thing. But yeah, bouncing allows you to go faster. It's the best way, besides edge sliding, to immediately cause a change in your speed. So a really good combo is the edge slide into a bounce. Whether like that or just straight into it. And you want to bounce as much as possible for as much speed. And it can also help you get even higher than normal while still maintaining a lot of speed that you can just immediately gain. So that's nice too. And even with bouncing, curving is applied. So this is without curving at all. But with adding a curve, going to the wall, out, to the wall, out, to the wall. If I can, this is kind of an awkward setup, but you can gain speed. So curving into the wall and kind of bouncing out and maintaining that like 30-degree angle for your entry angle to where you're going. 30 to 50, somewhere around there, 20 to 50. Just having any amount of curve is important. Curves are very important in first-person shooter games in a lot of different ways, and mainly for building speed, and it is definitely not an exception for Call of Duty games. Now, one more thing that you can do with walls, besides just bouncing on them, is let's go here. If you are thrusting into a wall, kind of do an arced wall run. I'll do that one more time. I did it on the way back too. an arced wall run. And you can see if I do it in a spot, where shall I guess I can just go here. Why I call it an arced wall run is because you begin to go down again, right? So you initially start raising, and then you go down again. So it can be used to get a little bit more elevation. So you can do something like this, and then jump and bounce. It's used in free run a decent amount, and it's very nice. A little bit mainly on infected. Another thing is, while wall running, you can stop your movement and go forward. That's just by pressing forward, halting all movement, pressing forward, halting all movement. So again, that allows you to go very slow on the wall. So let's say you're coming around here. Let's go to a spot. Okay, so you can time your engagements coming around a wall, for example, or in a spot where you can curve around something, like here. Oh, here's a good one. People don't know about this. Normally I can go through, yeah, like that. So if you're coming around here, by doing that, you can just slow down. Failed. This still isn't a very good example. Yeah, you can just be slow if you need to be when coming around a corner. And also, when coming around corners like these, if you jump immediately, if you can actually do it right, it propels you. So then also, you've seen me do this already, but instead of just holding the thrust to get up somewhere, right? Instead of just holding, you can tap it to get even higher up and sometimes even faster. Like obviously, you use your thrust faster this way, but it can be a much smoother transition by tapping it more, if you can manage doing so. As well as, like obviously, this is just really easy, quick, and stuff like that, but you can save your boost while going even higher by tapping it, getting a good quad burst in, or even quintuple is oftentimes a good decision as well. So managing your thrust is a very neat and useful mechanic, or tactic. So now on the ground level here, what we can do is we can Y-slide, which is doing a weapon swap and then sliding. Now the point of this is, let's just look at a normal slide. You have to pick yourself up right after it. You stop for a moment, you halt movement, and then you can continue sprinting forward. Whereas a Y-slide, you can just keep going. There's no halting. Now we can do a Y-slide Y to bring up our weapon again. Be very smooth with it. And just repeat this over and over for some massive speed. A lot of people like to do something like this, which, I mean, it's not terrible, but the Y-slide is definitely the way to go. Now, what you want to do is make sure that you have some boost left in your meter. So if you have no boost and you try to slide, let me just be smart about this. So no boost and you try to slide, it's very slow. But also, if you have less than half your boost, it's also somewhat slow. It doesn't go as far, I should say. Okay, so that distance. And that distance. See? And it's not just coming out from a jump either. So that can be used a lot with the Y slide, obviously. So if you don't have Afterburner, for example, and even if you do, you always want to wait until you have slightly more than half of your boost, or somewhere around there, so that you can get a longer slide as well. A more powerful, faster, and longer slide. That way, you're always being as efficient as possible. Now, obviously, you can also air strafe around, but the Y slide seems to be the better option because it, there's lots of things good about it. I'm not going to explain. Now, another thing that you can do besides just the Y slide is, let's say you're in air already, right? Let's say you're already in the air, you can punch slide. Now, this is something we do a lot in free run because you can't weapon swap. So, you jump, punch right before you land, and slide. It's the same exact thing. Before, you had to press Y before you land, or before you slide. But this can only be done mid-air. You can't obviously just punch and then slide. It's not gonna work. You have to be in air for it to work. So this is much better because, like, let's say, well, I haven't even tested this. Yeah, it looks like the Y slide doesn't even properly work. It's just better to punch coming out of a. Ooh, that was bad. It's just better to punch, trust me, because in situations like this, you're not gonna want to slide or press Y when you slide there. I don't think it even worked properly. That might have been because of Y, but doing something like that. Now, obviously, this is a terrible, like, you're not gonna ever need to punch slide or do anything here because there's no getting up animation. So obviously, in this situation, in this particular situation, you're just gonna want to slide off it, right? But let's find a better spot here, like here. If you knew it was safe to come up here, that is. Obviously, you wouldn't come from mid-map and go, like, you know, maybe you would, you know. But you get the point. Very nice. And another thing that you can do is, let's say you're shooting a guy in a real situation. Let's go, like, oh, you're shooting a guy, bleh, and you gotta reload. You're obviously not gonna wanna perform a Y slide and then reload and stuff like that. And, like, if you just reload right away, then, like, this is in terms of, let's say we wanted to get away, right? So, like, you wouldn't also want to reload and then perform your Y slide when you're way out here. That just, you know. But what you can do is press X in place of Y. So, press X and slide. That was a terrible example, but X slide, right? And it does the same exact thing. So if you need to reload, then reload and slide at the same time. And do that in place of a Y slide. Very nice, very easy. That's something that I forget to do very often. And it is a very nice combo that you can do if you need to reload while at the same time trying to slide away or to somewhere pretty fast. It's very nice. So another thing about bouncing is that the more downward speed that you have coming into a bounce, the greater outward you can convert your momentum to. So let's just do it here. Oh, if I can actually do it properly. That maybe didn't show it too well. That's probably trying to push it. There's too big of a gap. Let's do it here. Right? That's much better than what we just saw before because it immediately converted that downward speed there. But on somewhere like the 4 walls on Blackout, coming down that huge gap, you're able to launch yourself pretty far if you do it right. And that's because the further down you are, that was a good example, the further faster you're going downward, the greater the bounce. And that's also the further forward you're going, the greater the bounce. So just any speed you have really gets converted in the direction that you're trying to bounce to, which most of the time, the only thing that will affect it noticeably is your vertical height, because obviously you would expect your speed to continue if you come in at a large speed, but something unexpected for some people is that coming downward more gets more of a speed boost as well. It's just a little extra thing that I quite honestly can't show too well here, just take my word for it. One really cool thing about edge slides is you don't necessarily have to be on an edge to begin doing it. You can just simply jump up to an edge and then go. Except that's another thing to document. If you edge slide, sometimes you can get shot to hell. You just get shot straight down for no reason, just sometimes you're just unlucky like that. There are ways to prevent it and be a little bit safer with curving your edge slides a little bit that prevents it at certain angles that you can get used to by curving out the angle that you slide from. But it's just an unlucky thing that just happens all the time. But anyways, so you can jump up to something and edge slide off it. That's useful. If you're jumping up to some wall run, and jump mantle, you can do that instead of having to go all the way up to mantle. So if you're coming up and you wall run, you're coming up on a wall run and then jump up, you can get the mantle. Another neat thing about bouncing is you don't necessarily have to be wall running. There's also kind of a floor bounce. Oops. Kind of bounced right into it. But there's also kind of a floor bounce that you can do where as long as you have speed and you jump, you do kind of keep speed going through. Kinda. It's still better to slide unless you're trying to recharge boost for something else right after it, I guess, but you can kind of keep your speed a little bit. You can also bounce on the edges of almost anything. If your slide is about to reach its limit and you're going under something, you'll just keep sliding. You can also slide going backwards. And even edge slide. However, wall bouncing, even though it can be done, I still don't personally understand how backward wall bouncing works. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. You can also edge slide into a slide. If you're wall running and trying to look somewhere else, it's very hard to keep wall running forward. There becomes a point where it just won't let you anymore. Even no matter how hard you push right on the stick or left, depending on which way you're moving, you're turning and moving, it just won't let you anymore at some point. A few last things to note that I can't really just show easily because they're kind of rare is if you're edge sliding and I did kind of show it there, and you not really, never mind, but if you are trying to bounce off the edge, sometimes you can thrust and bounce at the same time, different from the arced wall run. Like, different from this, where it just goes into a wall run, but you actually bounce and thrust at the same time sometimes. As well as sometimes, even if you don't even jump, don't even press your jump button, you can bounce off, mainly on corners. It almost kind of happened there, not really a bounce, but that's kind of the situation in which it can happen. It oftentimes is considered a high bounce because oftentimes you go very high up in the air after bouncing on corners like that. I presume it's because you're bouncing on both sides of a wall, this side and this side, at the same time. That's why it probably happens, maybe, somewhat. You can even bounce while holding down your aim down sights. Edge slide, bounce, right? And finally, each character has their own very slight differences in how they move. You're just gonna have to trust me on this. There are very slight differences in every character. Now, just as a quick analysis, Ruin is very easy to use and very, very standard if you're just looking for something nice for like free run or something like that. And then Seraph is a little bit harder to use, but pays off very well because of mainly she just bounces better. Bounces further, bounces easier, but some other things are a bit thicker in terms of movements. There's a lot of differences which I could go into my own reasoning on why I think that happens, but for you guys to really understand it, just if you guys even want to, test it out for yourself. It's very small, very slight, hardly noticeable, except for Seraph's bounces. That's one of the most noticeable plus sides of a character, and that's why I use Seraph for free run. No lie. A lot of people joke that Seraph runs faster. No, of course not. There's no character that runs faster. No, but Seraph does, in fact, bounce better. And there's a lot of slight differences in every character. Most of these differences, however, are just in the rhythm on when you need to perform certain actions. Like, by the time you slide, when it actually does the slide, and when you need to thrust to properly do that. Just in the rhythm. Most of the differences between all these characters are just in the rhythm of how you press the buttons to make certain actions happen in the same amount of time. However, in certain cases, by changing the rhythm of doing certain things, it can make it slightly easier, slightly harder, thicker, looser, and slightly better or worse. But for the most part, you're not going to notice anything except for Seraph's bounces.